very nice to see you all here. Thank you for your presence. My name is Gabriela Oliveira. I work for the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean of the United Nations. I am Brazilian myself. Well, I had an experience living in the US, in Washington, D.C., doing my master's in international development. I'm doing now a PhD in tech and science politics, and working with carbon credit markets and sustainable development and electric mobility and what else, name it, a lot of things. I'm very proud of Brazil, and I hope I can give you a little bit of a frame of what are the potentialities of our country. Of course, there are many, many challenges, but I am a firm believer that there's much to offer and there's much to talk about, and I hope you guys can learn a little bit more about us and about the chances we have. I'm here with Mr. Terry Travis, from manager partner of EV Noir. Is that right? Great. And Bernardo Estefan, great, the carbonization specialist at Esalen. I'll give both the word to introduce themselves in a little bit. But our panel this morning is Innovating the Development Narrative, Brazil's Clean Energy Strategies. The world, as we know, or as we used to know, is gone, right? And it has to be. We're in desperate need for change, unless we're going to just burn down. The world has a commitment to avoid the rise of 1.5 degrees, and it has to be a global commitment. It has to be a global effort. This is the one thing where we see cooperation is more than needed. If one part does and the other doesn't, we're all going to go to the same destiny, which is not good. Doesn't look nice. Brazil is in a special place to promote energy transition and help the world in this mission. We are rich in many ways. Brazil is the most biodiverse country in the world. It's one of the largest net exporters of food, meaning that we not only produce enough food for the population, but we produce so much that we export. More than 80%, around 85% of our energy sector is renewable. The energy we produce is largely, massively renewable, and there are many ways through which we achieve that, through hydropower, solar, wind power. Agro in Brazil is so huge. We're developing biotechnology, and there's so much to talk about of what Brazil can offer as a key player in the global economies, the decarbonization process, while driving, that's the point, sustainable and inclusive development, okay? So let's take this window, this opportunity, not only to change the economy, but to promote inclusive social equality and make things better, right? I would like to invite Mr. Terry here to say a few words about himself, and then please Bernardo, and then we'll start our panel with a few questions.
Okay, now we're good. Hey, good morning, everybody. I'm Terry Travis with EV Noir. My company works on the future of mobility, which is electric, connected, shared, and autonomous. At no given point in time in human history have we seen disruption in the way that we have now. And the idea is the way that we move people, goods, and services is increasingly changing. How many folks have had anything delivered to their home from a company, Amazon, DoorDash, like any of these companies that are similar? The idea is that we're seeing a disruption in the way that things are being moved, and the way that we are seeing first and last mile delivery, vehicle ownership, and the way that we think about mobility is changing extremely rapidly. And so I'm looking forward to today's conversation to explore this, across the diaspora.
Okay, it's working. I think about myself. Well, I started my career years ago working with huge transactions. My transaction in my career, it was Boeing Embraer deal. To make the deal and then to break the deal. Yes, it happened in the middle of COVID. So after that, I said to myself, I don't want to sell and buy business. I want to develop business. And I started developing energy transition businesses. I worked with AV's infrastructure projects. And most recently, I joined the invested company of the sovereign fund of Abu Dhabi, ASELAN, to develop a biofuel business in Brazil that will be developed in Bahia, one of the poorest states in Brazil, and it will have a huge social impact. That's what drives me, making social and environmental impact. So I think that's what we are going to talk a little bit in this panel.
Wonderful. There's so much to talk about. I would like to start and saying, well, I will ask Bernardo, maybe it's more obvious to ask you, how do you see Brazil's role in this energy transition? But then I'll ask you, Terry, how do you see the diasporas, or you can talk a little bit about the Caribbean and other smaller countries or developing countries. What are their role for the energy transition? It's of course obvious to talk about the big guys, but we want to know who are these people who really have the huge reserves of resources, right? Natural resources. What are their roles besides only offering water, only offering, the primary goods? What are their role in this? So we'll start with Bernardo and then Terry follow, please. Microphone. Yeah.
Well, as you talked in the beginning, Brazil already has a very clean energy metrics. So we produce 85% of clean energy. I don't see the role of Brazil just being more sustainable here, but exporting the carbonization. And biofuels are one of the ways to reduce the global emissions. So producing low carbon intensity biofuels here in Brazil and exporting it to the world, or compensating like the sustainable aviation fuel that we will produce here in Brazil, maybe we can compensate emissions of Europe and United States and not making more emissions to transport the fuel to the US or to Europe. So I see the role of Brazil as exporting decarbonization. The energy sector in Brazil will play this role. We have an agribusiness that has a huge potential. We have nice crops. And in Brazil, we have lots of degraded land that can be restored and can produce biofuels to the world. And not only biofuels. There are crops being developed in Brazil, like macaúba, the one that we will use in my project, that can produce at the same time fuel, feed, food, fiber. So we can produce at the same time many needs that the world has. We can combat hunger and at the same time produce the biofuels that has a really low carbon intensity that will make people keep traveling around the world by planes. You don't have to stop traveling by plane, but you need a fuel that don't has the emissions that current fuels has. So that's the role that I see for Brazil, exporting decarbonization. Energy sector is not just energy. It accounts for most of the emissions. So it's a carbon market too. They are together.
And I'll just say that, like, when we think about this, it really comes down to, right now, we're trying to get to a circular economy, right? So the idea is that what we put into it, we're able to gain things from that, from a renewable circular economy. One of the things that we've been working on in the movement of people is, as Bernardo mentioned, working with airlines on SAF, or sustainable aviation fuels. One of the things that happens is that we all travel, or some of us travel here, by airplane. The aviation sector is very carbon intensive currently. And so it actually produces high amounts of carbon. And there are a lot of folks around the world who are looking at this. Folks on my team are looking at not just sustainable aviation fuels, but also looking at what happens below the wing. If you go to most airports, aircraft is really generated. I came from the aerospace industry before all of this. The idea is that everything that's below the wing has usually been diesel generators, right? Now we're beginning to see airlines, airports around the world. I flew into Amsterdam. Literally, there are electric buses that pick you up at the plane, take you to the terminal. All of the carts that are moving luggage, they're becoming zero emission vehicles. So the idea is that what we're seeing around the world is really changing very rapidly. In addition to that, part of the work that we're doing is to ensure that it's a just transition. So you can't have folks who are the wealthiest class as the only ones who are benefiting from this. You have to have folks at every different level of socioeconomics, education, and geographies benefiting from this in the same way. So Gabriela mentioned outside, it's part of this just transition strategy. And the idea is that folks who live in urban cores, as well as folks who live in rural communities, to be able to benefit from transportation and mobility in the same way. I'll kind of stop there so that we can.
Please stop. So we have more to talk about in the next questions that I prepared. So, no, I just want to go back. We have here amazing specialists working in different fronts and countries that I would love to learn more about your projects and your experiences. We just had at COP, the Conference of the Parties in Dubai, the document that started saying it's the beginning of the end. So I would love to learn how the work you're doing is pointing to the beginning, or is starting, it's igniting sustainably with low carbon emissions, the beginning of the end.
So, as I said, I work for the Sovereign Fund of Abu Dhabi. And as all of you know, Middle East has the main players of the oil and gas sector. So these companies already know that the energy has started and that fossil fuels has not much time as they thought years ago. They have to make the transition, and they are funding this transition. They don't want to lose their role in the energy sector. It is strategic for them. So they are funding projects like mine. There are many others. They are funding like ethanol. They are funding the kind of biofuel that I'm producing, like HVO, SAF. And it has started. There are many solutions that will be necessary for the transition. He works with EVs that are one solution. I work with biofuels. The transition is already happening, and we will see in the next few years I think no more fossil fuels for mobility, and aviation already has a plan to decarbonize. In 2007, Corsia will require airlines to start using, it will be mandatory to use SAF. And gradually, they will just use SAF. So we already had a plan. We already have a plan, and we are making efforts to transition.
Can, just before we go to Terry, please let us know a little bit more about Macaúba and the specific project, the special culture, the culture of Macaúba, and how it's this golden, sustainable solution.
One of the challenges nowadays for biofuels are we have the land and we have to use it in a smart way. So we need high oil yield crops. And Macaúba, as I said before, can provide food and fuel at the same time. And it has a yield that is really high. It does not have a high water usage, and it can grow in degraded land. We are restoring degraded land. So that's why Macaúba has been so researched. And there are other crops that they are studying that fit perfectly because they can provide food, fiber, fuel, all at the same time. That's why Macaúba is so important. And it's a native plant, so we are not importing a crop to develop biofuels. We are using something that is from our country.
And can you just give us a better understanding what of the scale of Macaúba crop production in Brazil? How can it, how much of biofuels can it be made out of Macaúba, and what are the forecasts of your project?
It is really interesting because they started studying Macaúba 20 years ago. The Fraunhofer Institute in Germany started researching about that, and another research institute in Spain. And Macaúba has been used for native Brazilians for centuries. But nobody saw potential to Macaúba until 20 years ago. 20 years ago, they started studying Macaúba, and now we see Macaúba as a clear choice for biofuels and protein. So we started developing it for commercial scale. And our project will be the first one to plant 200,000 hectares of Macaúba. We are starting now to plant 200,000 hectares of Macaúba. Our main goal is to plant 1 million hectares. But it has no commercial use, just the natives of Brazil that use it, and small communities. Wonderful. For food purposes.
Wonderful. That's really impressive. Terry, please let us know about your projects on electromobility, how you started working with this, but what is your vision? Do you really think most of our vehicles will be electric in a few years? What are the challenges that we'll face towards that reality, if it's a feasible reality? And what will that implicate to our energy production? Is it really sustainable? It's important to discuss the extent to which solutions are sustainable completely. We don't have any bulletproof solution, but please let us know about the work you do and your understanding of electromobility.
Yeah, so it's really interesting. You gave me an easy question. Huh?
Yes.
So the idea.
You take notes of his answer because it's probably.
Yeah, it's like that was a softball. You gave me the easy one, right? So I do believe that as we move forward, the idea is that clean transportation or zero emission vehicles have to come into play. Yeah. I don't know that anyone has a timetable to know when that is exactly going to happen, but it is happening. Globally, there's about 2 trillion, not billion, but $2 trillion being invested into this. If you think about automotive manufacturers on a global scale, all of them have an electric vehicle strategy. The number one automotive manufacturer in the world right now today is a company out of China called BYD.
Yes.
BYD is now selling more electric vehicles than anybody else in the world, followed by Tesla. Most people who are US based know about Tesla. But the idea is that this is a business proposition. For most folks who have driven a traditional internal combustion engine vehicle, we have 100+ years of habit with driving internal combustion vehicles. But anybody that's ever driven an electric vehicle, I've only driven electric vehicles for about the past 15 years, ended up working on the development of several, as well as charging infrastructure. It's just a better vehicle. And I use this as an example. Disruption happens very quickly. June 29th, 2009, something happened in the world that changed the rest of us moving forward. Does anybody know what that was? Anybody? Take a guess. So we all have these mobile devices in our pockets. Steve Jobs did at the Apple Summit, June 29th, 2009, he said, we're introducing this new phone. And before then, folks had cell phones, but they were like a flip phone and this, that, and the third. But the idea is that it diametrically changed the way that we communicated because we could actually access maps, bank accounts, all of these other things. Mobility is very similar in the same way. I'm going to say something that is a little controversial, but it is what it is. Very soon, people aren't going to own a vehicle, but that's a longer conversation, but it is coming. It's actually coming as rapidly as electrification has happened. Has anybody here taken an Uber recently? One of the projects that we're working on currently is working with Uber to electrify its platform by 2035, everywhere in the world, which is 11 years from now. You will not be able to drive an internal or a gas vehicle on the Uber platform. It is 2025 for the EU. So when you start thinking about that, that is a really short time frame and window. And so the idea is that it's not a question of, is the world going to electrify because the train has left the station on that one? But the idea is that, what does that transition look like? Who benefits from it? How do we get in front of it? One of the things that we've also been working on that we think is critically important to that is there are a lot of jobs and economic inclusion opportunities that are coming with this. And if folks that are across the diaspora aren't really engaged in these conversations, we're going to get left out of we're going to get left out of these jobs. And so when we talk about a $2 trillion investment, when I go to conferences, I am the only person that looks like me on panels speaking about this. Yeah. It's crazy. And so the idea is that I'm a really staunch advocate that we really have to get more diverse folks working in this space so that as we accelerate to a clean transportation future, it is inclusive and very reflective of what the world looks like as opposed to where we are now.
Truly impressive, huh? It's almost like we are seeing big changes, and I can tell, like when I was a kid, you would think changes are these things that are always in the future and are always talking about, but these things are moving so fast. And I think one important thing for us to think as a developing country and the development idea of how we're going to build capacities within. Right? You were just mentioning BYD, this huge company, Chinese, and well, if we're pushed in this market of electric cars, are you just importing what are you doing in your countries? What are you doing in the developing countries? We're just extracting lithium for the batteries, or we're going to raise capacities. We're going to build here knowledge. I would love you to make some comments about that. Terry.
So one of the things that really we have to begin to think about is that a lot of the critical minerals that are used to manufacture electric vehicles, cell phones, laptops are coming from the global south. But what you see globally is that there are countries right now that are benefiting from these critical minerals. Norway, Sweden, the UK, you name it. And the idea is that those resources are coming from the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Malaysia, Indonesia, all of these places around the world, right? So what we really need to focus in on is how can the countries where these critical minerals are coming from be the benefactors in the same way that folks in the global north are benefiting. At COP, the last several COPs, this has been a high topic of conversation, and it's really something that we have to begin to think about. And then going back to what I was talking about, that circular economy, one of the things that happens is that I'm going to make this a little bit more interactive. I don't like these, I don't want to feel like I'm in an academic classroom. So I want to ask you all a question because I think you all can provide information to us just as much as we can provide to you all. When do you all think that the first electric vehicles were developed? Anybody? Come on. Don't you don't cheat.
Stuff.
Don't you cheat.
You know things.
2010. Somebody from this side. So anybody else? 2000. What'd you say? 1910. So around the early 1900s is really the right answer, right? That's closer to the answer. So, and I'm gonna make this make sense for folks. In 1890, as we went from horses, we went to horseless carriages. And so the idea is that in New York City, a third of the vehicles in the early 1900s were electric vehicles. The other third was steam powered. And then you had a mix of other things that people were using to get around. So when I talk to folks, my family, colleagues, and I say to them, hey, you might want to think about this vehicle or this type of powertrain in a vehicle. Oh, I'm going to let them work the kinks out. These vehicles have been around before gas vehicles, but what happens is that we have 100+ years of habit with fossil fuel vehicles, and so it actually has shaped the way that we think about how we should move. What I tell folks is that driving an electric vehicle, there's not a gas station at your home or your apartment building or wherever you live. But guess what? As long as there's an outlet, you can charge said vehicle, right? One of the things that we're doing in the Caribbean, and specifically as we were talking about outside, is Caribbean island nations have wind, water, solar. So as we talk about Brazil being at about 85% renewable energy, if anybody has been to Latin America, the Caribbean, fuel prices are extremely high. So if you use that wind, water, solar to power trains in those vehicles, you now provide economic stability and a better introduction into that economy. One of the things that's really challenging is that we also are in a position where we should be working towards energy independence. One of the biggest things about clean transportation is that right now, outside of what Brazil is doing with ethanol and some of the other biofuels, most countries are importing oil from other places. And many of those places are very volatile. And so the idea is that what happens on the other side of the world affects fuel prices. And so the idea is that if you're producing local energy that is renewable, now you control your economics and destiny. So I'll stop there.
Wonderful. Oh my God. I am sure everyone is really thinking a lot. Now, I think what we're talking about here is that change is inevitable. sometimes unavoidable, right? Sometimes we know that the change now is being driven by this sustainability, and then the name of our panel is narrative, which can have a positive and a negative tone, but this is the narrative. However, are we just taking in whatever is decided by others, or are we part of this decision? What are we building for this transformation that is guiding the world? If it's for business purposes, if it's for social purposes, how are we putting our voices? And that's, I think, my role here as a Brazilian and, well, working for the United Nations and thinking about the capacities that we're building within and that we're building with communities, is thinking, okay, this is a big opportunity window, right? And this is for the good. We need to decarbonize the world. But how we're going to be part of the process of decision. We're not just supplying whatever people are telling us to do. With that, I would like to start asking you to bring what are the opportunities for social development and inclusion within your projects. I think, Terry, we're just discussing the public transportation, maybe the angle to socialize the benefits of electromobility. But I would start with Bernardo. Bernardo, I think it's so interesting for people to understand, as a primary economy, Brazil is heavily based on agribusiness, right? And extraction. It's not all bad. It's not all bad. But how are we making this added value, right? Source like energy, biofuel, by elevating, leveraging, and promoting familiar agriculture and social inclusion and all the levels that we can, trickle down the benefits of enlarging this market worldwide, please.
Well, as you said, Brazil has a great agricultural potential. And my project is a biofuel project, and it's verticalized. So we developed the project from seed to fuel. So we plant the crop, and we do the harvest, we do all the process. And designing a project since the beginning gave us to design it for sustainability. And sustainability for us mean impact, not only environmental, but socially too. So we choose to develop the project in Bahia, that is a state that it's not rich. São Paulo is rich, Rio is rich, but we choose Bahia, that is a poor state of Brazil. And since the beginning, we said, no, we don't want to make all the production of macaúba inside a silence operation. We want to have third parties together. We want to have small farmers together. So we have our research center. We are developing the genetics of macaúba, but we choose to develop the project together with small farmers. So we will affect those communities. We will give them opportunities to live in the countryside. They don't need to live in big cities. If they want, they can live there, produce there. We will buy all the production of macaúba, extract the oil, and make the fuel in a biorefinery. So that's the way we are affecting socially the state of Bahia. And we choose the state of Bahia to bring all the $15 billion impact in 10 years to a state that needs it.
So one of the things that in the U.S., we're working with the 25 largest cities. So the panel right before this, there were a number of mayors talking about what their strategies were. So we're working with those mayors in the 25 largest cities, as well as the federal government, and then a number of international groups as well. One of the things that our personal mission as a company, when we go in to work with cities, municipalities, federal government, airlines, is we can't go into communities and be prescriptive about what we think is best for those communities. Our strategy is to work, one, with the community to find out what their mobility and transportation needs are. We have been brought in on projects where folks who are outside of the community parachute in, and they often say, hey, community, particularly in under-resourced communities, we know what's best for you.
Right.
And what happens is that I'll give a really quick example. We were working in an agricultural community in Central Valley, California, and a number of the folks there, work in the agricultural industry. They didn't have driver's licenses. So to bring electric vehicles in wasn't the best solution. What we actually found was e-bikes and a way for them to get from their home to their place of work or to like social services, schools, doctor appointment or medical appointments, dental appointments. And so the idea is that it's really important not to be prescriptive to a community, but to often listen to that community first, find out what their needs are, assess what is going to be best for them, and then bring that into the conversation in a way that they feel a part of the process and not as though somebody is employing on them something that, because we always think, folks think that they're smarter or they're brighter. And it is, in working with the folks at Uber, people don't realize that Uber was, if anybody has ever been to developing or growing economies, that construct of rideshare is everywhere. If you go to the Caribbean, there are dollar buses. If you go to India, there are dollar buses. All Uber and Lyft did was put a technology platform around something that communities have been utilizing for years.
True. And I think there is this aspect of technology that we always assume it's better. It's hot, right? It's so sexy. It's something new. And maybe with electromobility is this idea, this is going to revolutionize and it's beautiful. But wait a minute, how does this really affect employee? How, and I think it's so important that we make these discussions. Talking about nowadays, what we have with electric vehicles is that it represents a luxury good. But when we're talking about public vehicles, public transportation vehicles such as buses, then we are socializing the benefits. And the question is, are these buses going to go to the peripheral areas, such as we were discussing the other day, where the mostly poor communities live, and it will take larger, transit destinies, and will the buses be able to have the autonomy, the battery enough to go there? So will they be affected at all? Will they gain from the decarbonization, the air pollution reduction, and all of these things? So it's important that we think of technology as this thing that is not gonna really just save us all. Maybe will create even more divide. So how do we apply that, right? So I think that part is important. Do you guys have any comments on that part?
Well, there's nothing to do with my current project. When I worked with electric vehicles in Brazil, one of the challenges that I see is Brazil is a huge country. So to socialize electrical vehicles in Brazil, the hugest challenge is infrastructure. You have to make a proper infrastructure for electric vehicles. Nowadays, what we see is rich cities like São Paulo and Rio de Janeiro having chargers for electrical vehicles, and no other part of the country. That's what's happening. So electrical vehicles in Brazil are a luxury.
And that's going to change. So what I would say is that right now the perception is that electric vehicles are a luxury item. When you go into China, when you go into other parts of the world that are far more mature in this space, people are choosing to drive zero emission or electric vehicles because they're just better vehicles, right? We've hit price parity. For the most part, batteries now are being manufactured. We're at about $100 US per kilowatt. So the idea is that BYD, GHG, Li, Chery, some of the Chinese manufacturers are able to produce vehicles at a much lower cost than their gas counterparts. So now we're starting to see things change. But the idea is that as we think about this, the opportunity, as we talk about the opportunities for infrastructure, those are going to be jobs that come. If we talk about, and we think about this in this way, maybe 15 years ago, I remember having a conversation with my family, and they were saying, computers are taking jobs and all of these things, and what are folks going to be able to do? Well, think about this. I don't know if there's a person in this room that does not know someone that works in IT or some form or fashion. Jobs that there used to be a person in every city around the world that stood on an elevator and actually had the elevator. He was the one that pushed the lever, and it would get to the floor, and he would open the doors, and you would get off. You don't see that anymore, right? And so the idea is that disruption happens in a very it hits what's called the S curve. And so what's really important as Brazil and other parts of the world develop these technologies, it's really important to make sure that during that transition, we're economically thinking about this. One of the other things that I'll bring to this is that the fossil fuel industry, what Bernardo said earlier is the truest. If you didn't take anything away from any of the things that we said, there's a finite source of fossil fuel on the planet, period.
Yeah.
So we know that we have to make a transition. One of the things that I will say is that the Saudis are not only investing in biofuels, but they've also did a $14 billion investment in Lucid Motors. They're building a city called The Line, which is a totally sustainable city with no vehicles. So the idea is that when we think about these countries and these parts of the world, like Shell just bought a charging network company. They changed their name to Shell Recharge. BP has bought a number of charging network companies. So these fossil fuel companies are now beginning to transition in a really quickly intentional way. So it's really important that we understand that this transition is happening.
Wonderful. We're reaching out to the end of our panel, but I would just like us to ask you guys, does anyone have a question? It would be lovely to have your participation. Okay, we have Uri there. The mic's here.
Thank you very much for the panel. I would like to add a question for you two and Gabriela as well. How the concept of walkable cities for 20 minutes of you can access every services that you have, or the discussions about not being needed to have a car enters in these discussions. Is companies thinking about that of investing in fossil fuels only for extremely necessary measures and to build cities that are more walkable and has less need of that kind of transportation? Thank you.
Do you wanna?
Absolutely. One of the things, I spend a lot of time in Europe, particularly in Norway. Oslo is a extremely walkable city. One of the things that they've done is the way that the cities are set up. Like actually, in Europe, you can't drive a internal combustion engine vehicle in the city based on your license plate on alternating days. In addition to that, there's no public parking for internal combustion engine vehicles in Oslo. So they've made it a really walkable city, and you see a lot more clean air. You see a lot more folks moving around in different ways. But yes, folks are thinking about that. And I have urban planners on my team who reinforce that to me every day.
Well, now I will speak a little bit from my perspective, my current professional perspective, but I will speak as a former architect and urbanist too. Well, I don't drive. I don't have a car. I go to my office daily using subway, but there are cities that already exist, and we need solutions for these cities. But new cities that are smaller than you can totally walk are 100% okay, but they are a look for the future. We need solutions for New York, São Paulo, and cities in the UK like London and Paris. Great cities around the world. So I think that we can have these new cities, let you say, and like the line, but we need solutions for the cities that we already have.
Wonderful. Thank you all for joining us in this panel. It's been a pleasure. Hope we can have more wonderful discussions like this. Bye-bye.